Hey guys, tonight we're doing something a little different. You're not about to listen to a dramatic battle, a king's betrayal, or some thrilling mystery. No, tonight, we're going to talk about sleep. The kind that's boring, soothing, and perfectly dull enough to make your eyelids feel heavy in the best way possible. We're stepping back into the medieval world, where nights were darker, colder, and honestly weirder than you'd imagine. Candles sputtered, roofs leaked, and beds were often just bags of straw crawling with things that could keep you awake for reasons you don't want to think about. You're about to find out that the act of simply going to bed was a surprisingly adventurous part of life, and one you probably wouldn't survive for long without a modern mattress. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, drop a comment with where you're watching from and what time it is where you are. I always love seeing how far this sleepy little community has spread across the globe. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You begin by imagining yourself walking through a medieval town at twilight. The sun's dipped below the horizon, and the last orange streaks fade behind crooked rooftops. The smell of wood smoke curls from chimneys, and the air carries a damp, earthy coolness. There's no hum of engines, no street lamps, no buzz of electricity. Just you, your breath, and a world that's about to plunge into total darkness. In the 1300s, the medieval night was practically another planet. The average person owned maybe one candle, and burning it after dark meant wasting money. Firelight was precious, so the moment the sun slipped away, you'd feel time itself slow down. People worked by daylight and lived by it. When the light left, most of life paused. But even then, not everyone could just crawl into bed. Imagine stepping inside a small timber-framed house. Smoke stains the rafters, the floor's dirt, and in the corner there's a bed, a sagging wooden frame strung with rope and stuffed with hay. A couple snores softly on it, wrapped in coarse linen that smells faintly of sweat and sheep's wool. Children curl up nearby on the floor, huddled under old cloaks. You might think this sounds miserable, but for them, this was comfort. We tend to picture the past as silent, but the medieval night was full of tiny noises. Somewhere outside a cow lowed, dogs barked in the distance. The wind nudged a shutter loose and made it rattle softly. Every sound carried through the dark like a whisper from something unseen. For many, those noises weren't soothing. They were unsettling reminders of how fragile night safety was. You hear a faint shuffle, maybe a rat in the thatch roof, or a neighbor walking by with a lantern. That glow of yellow light flickers through the cracks and disappears. You'd pull the blanket closer, trying not to imagine what else might be wandering in the dark. People believed the night was when spirits roamed most freely. Night air was thought to carry illness, so windows stayed shut, even in the heat. No wonder everyone smelled a bit earthy, and sleep wasn't guaranteed. With all that noise, smoke, and cramped space, drifting off could take a while. So people developed bedtime rituals. Maybe a quick prayer, God give me a good night, and keep the devils from my door. Maybe a drink of warm ale or watered down wine. Or maybe you just sat quietly, staring into the embers until your vision blurred and you surrendered to the heaviness in your limbs. It's strange to think how unprivate medieval sleeping was. You rarely slept alone. Even married couples might share their bed with servants or guests, partly for warmth and partly because space was limited. A single bed might host a nobleman, his page, and maybe even a family dog, all squished together like an accidental sleepover. You couldn't really hide your snoring or your midnight muttering. It was all public domain. You stretch your mind further, to a castle chamber. The lord of the manor lies under embroidered covers, but his attendants sleep right there on the floor. Candles gutter in iron sconces. The walls are hung with tapestries not for decoration, but insulation. Outside the heavy wooden door, guards murmur softly to stay awake. Even here, sleep feels more like a truce with the night than a guarantee of peace. The medieval world had a complicated relationship with sleep. On one hand, it was seen as natural and necessary, a divine pause, a time when the body restored itself. On the other, too much sleep was considered lazy or even sinful. Monks preached moderation, rise early, rest little, and devote your waking hours to prayer and work. The famous saying, idle hands are the devil's workshop. It applied to sleepy heads too. Historians still argue whether medieval people actually slept less or just differently. Some evidence suggests they woke up halfway through the night for an hour or two before going back to bed. A pattern called biphasic sleep. But we'll get there later. For now, you just feel the rhythm of the medieval night wrapping around you, a blend of routine, fear, and quiet acceptance. You imagine lying down on that straw tick. It's lumpy, itchy, and smells faintly of hay and sweat. You roll to one side, and the rope bed creaks so loudly that a child stirs in the corner. You whisper an apology, but nobody's really awake enough to mind. The warmth of shared breath fills the small room. Somewhere outside, a rooster crows far too early, confused by the moonlight. As your imaginary self adjusts to the discomfort, You can almost feel how precious rest must have been. People worked long hours, sunrise to sunset, doing hard physical labor. So when they finally lay down, exhaustion was absolute. Falling asleep wasn't about comfort, it was about survival. But then again, not everyone was so tired they could ignore the world's sounds. Some nights, you'd lie awake, listening to the timber creak and the wind moan through the gaps. You might tell yourself that's just the house settling. Or maybe it's something else. Medieval folklore was full of creatures that prowled the night: witches, restless souls, or the dreaded mare. A spirit said to sit on your chest and steal your breath while you slept. The word nightmare literally comes from that legend. To ward off such terrors, people hung charms near their beds, tiny crosses, sprigs of herbs, or little cloth bags filled with salt. You might whisper a rhyme or place an iron nail under your pillow for protection. Was it superstition? Definitely. But when the only thing separating you from the dark was a thin wooden door, you took every precaution you could. Every flicker of a candle cast long, uncertain shadows across the walls. Your mind, lulled by the rhythm of firelight, started to drift. The day's noise faded. You heard someone turn in their sleep, muttering softly. Outside, the stars glimmered like cold pinholes in a black velvet sky. You think about how different your bedtime is now: screens, mattresses, and maybe a playlist of rain sounds to help you drift off. Back then, nature did all the work. The hum of insects, the sigh of wind, the distant call of an owl, a kind of primitive ASMR before microphones were even a dream. The night deepens. Someone snores. Another coughs. You realize how human these sounds are, small, messy, and oddly comforting. Despite the filth, the fear, and the discomfort, there's still peace here. A medieval home at night feels alive in its own quiet way, and as the hours stretch on, the candle finally dies, plunging the room into complete darkness. You can't see your own hand. You can't tell who's beside you. You can only feel the rough linen under your fingers, smell the faint smoke from the hearth, and listen to the slow, steady breathing around you. This, you think, is what it means to sleep in the Middle Ages. No alarms, no notifications, just the rhythm of bodies winding down after a long day. You close your eyes, letting that image sink into you, as if you too are part of this ancient, sleepy silence. Because in a way you are. Every time you yawn before bed, you're echoing centuries of people who did the same, pulling closer to warmth, trying to forget the darkness outside, and surrendering to the quiet that waits at the edge of every day. You're not sure what wakes you first, the silence, or the faint crackle from the hearth's dying embers. The air feels heavier now, colder, damp in the corners. Someone stirs beside you, muttering in their sleep, and you realize the entire room is half awake. In the faint gray light you can see outlines of faces, the ghostly shape of the wooden beams above, and a thin thread of dawn trying to sneak through the shutters. But it's not morning yet. Not really. What you've stumbled into is something medieval people knew well: the space between sleeps. In the Middle Ages, most people didn't sleep in one long stretch like you do. They had what was called the first sleep and the second sleep. The first lasted for about 4 hours, starting not long after sundown. Then for an hour or two in the middle of the night, people would wake up, calmly, naturally, without panic. They called this quiet gap the watch. It was a time to pray, think, or if you were lucky, get up to other small-scale mischief. You sit up slowly, rubbing your eyes. The fire's mostly ash now, glowing faintly like dying coals on a faraway planet. Someone across the room yawns, stretches, and reaches for a candle stub. The soft scrape of flint and steel breaks the silence, and a flicker of flame blooms again, revealing faces half lit and calm. This isn't insomnia, it's routine. Historians still argue whether this bephisic sleep was universal or mostly European. There are records from France, England, and Italy mentioning it, but similar habits appeared elsewhere too. People waking naturally at midnight, as if their bodies knew something we've forgotten. Maybe it was the lack of artificial light, maybe diet, maybe temperature, or maybe humans were never meant to sleep in one long block at all. In the medieval mindset, this watch wasn't wasted time, it was sacred. You might whisper a short prayer, reciting familiar Latin words even if you didn't fully understand them. You might check the animals outside or stir the fire. Some couples use the time to talk quietly, or, let's be honest, do things you definitely wouldn't want to discuss while the rest of the family slept nearby. Medieval chroniclers even hinted that this period was considered a blessed time for intimacy. So much for romance novels. The real candlelight mood was half past midnight, between snores. As you imagine yourself sitting there in that dim light, the rhythm of it all feels oddly peaceful. No rush, no panic about not sleeping enough. Your body just knows when to rest and when to wake. During those hours, people reflected, told stories, or even visited neighbors if the moon was bright. The world was silent, the air cool, and the roads empty. Perfect conditions for whispered conversations or quiet moments of solitude. One French peasant's diary from the 1400s described it beautifully. After my first sleep, I rose and sat by the fire and thought of my dreams, and prayed that God forgive my sins. There's something hauntingly serene about that, like the night itself invited you to think. You look toward the door. Outside, the village is still wrapped in blackness. Somewhere far off, a rooster crows too early again, probably confusing the moonlight for dawn. Maybe a dog barks in reply. You feel that gentle pull between worlds, the half-dream state where thoughts drift in slow motion. A woman in the corner murmurs softly, half asleep but smiling. Maybe she's dreaming again already, or maybe she's talking to someone unseen. The candle flame bends with her breath. Time feels slower now, almost liquid. You can imagine the scholars of the time debating this. Though to be fair, most of them were monks who barely slept at all. They saw the midnight waking as a divine opportunity, a moment when the soul was closest to God. Sleep itself was often tied to morality. Too little made you weak, too much made you sinful. Finding balance was part of spiritual discipline. And yet, outside the monasteries, peasants treated it far more practically. You had to chop wood, feed animals, or maybe relieve yourself outside in the cold before returning to bed. Some even used the watch to tell the time. Without clocks, they'd look at stars or candle lengths, guessing how long till dawn. If you ever wondered why old tales talk about cockcrow or matins, this is why. People measured the night by nature's signals. You picture yourself stepping out into that night air. It bites at your skin, crisp and earthy. The moon hangs like a pale coin, and the world is utterly still. You see smoke curling from a neighbor's roof, meaning they too are awake, tending their coals. Maybe, you think, there's a comfort in knowing others are stirring in the dark. Tiny pockets of life in a sleeping world. You wander a little, feeling gravel under your bare feet, and you start to notice how alive the night actually is. Owls call softly from trees. The wind carries a faint sound of a stream. Even the cold feels sharper, clearer, like it's brushing your thoughts clean. You realize why some medieval thinkers believed the night was a time when the body and soul spoke to each other. Of course, not everyone loved the gap between sleeps. In larger towns, thieves and drunkards were known to roam during those hours. Locks were crude and candles expensive. You'd hesitate before lighting another one. Wastefulness could mean trouble later. So many people simply stayed in bed, whispering or lying still, eyes open, waiting for the second sleep to come naturally. Modern researchers have actually tested this idea. When volunteers lived for weeks without artificial light, their bodies started to copy the same pattern, fall asleep soon after dusk, wake up around midnight, stay up for an hour or two, then fall into a second, deeper sleep until morning. It's as if the medieval body knew what your modern one forgot, that rest comes in waves. You shuffle back inside the small house, slipping under the rough blanket again. The warmth is immediate. You hear breathing slow, the candles snuff out. The darkness folds around you once more. The second sleep begins, longer, heavier, dream-filled. Medieval people often said their dreams during this second round were more vivid, more meaningful. Maybe it was the brain dipping deeper now that the body was fully relaxed. Or maybe, as priests like to say, it was the hour when the soul was open enough for visions. Historians still argue whether these dreams really shaped people's choices, or whether they were just another outlet for anxiety and imagination. But in an age without therapy or TikTok scrolling, dreams were everything. People recorded them in letters, confessed them to priests, even used them to justify decisions. God showed me in a dream was the medieval equivalent of, I read it online. And you, still imagining yourself lying in that bed, start to drift into one too. You dream of a meadow under silver moonlight, of torches flickering in the distance, of quiet voices you almost recognize. The kind of dream that feels both ancient and personal, like a memory borrowed from someone else. Hours later, the first true light of dawn pushes its way through the shutters. A rooster crows again, this time on cue. The second sleep ends. People rise slowly, stretching, groaning, reaching for shoes. Someone stokes the fire. Someone else fetches water. You can smell smoke, bread dough, and life returning. And as you blink against the morning gray, you realize how different this feels from your alarm clock. There's no rush, no panic, just a natural slide from rest into wakefulness, as gentle as the sunrise itself. You might even think maybe the medievals had this one thing figured out. You're still half dreaming when the morning light filters through the shutters. Thin, silvery, hesitant. The fire's been coaxed back to life, and its warmth rolls over your skin like a slow sigh. But before you can enjoy the comfort, you feel something poke you in the back. You shift, and another jab follows. No, it's not a ghost, it's your bed. Or rather, what medieval people called a bed. You roll over and stare down at the lumpy, uneven surface beneath you. A few pieces of straw stick through the rough linen tick, sharp enough to scratch. The smell is, let's just say, earthy. Welcome to the reality of feather beds and straw ticks, where comfort was a rare and questionable luxury. In the Middle Ages, the quality of your bed said everything about who you were. If you were rich, truly rich, you might have a feather mattress, layered with wool blankets and sheets woven from linen so fine it felt almost like silk. You'd rest beneath heavy drapes to block the chill, cocooned in fabric and status. But if you were anyone else, Farmer, laborer, merchant, servant, you got straw. Lots of it. Straw beds were the default, stuffed into a large sack called a tick. You'd refill it every few months, ideally when the bugs got too ambitious or the smell started leaning toward compost. The straw broke down quickly, flattened, and sometimes grew mold. Imagine lying in a damp field all night, but warmer, and with the faint company of fleas. You push a hand into the mattress and hear the crunch, that dry rustle of hay that's somehow both comforting and annoying. It's funny how something so simple carried so much meaning. Beds weren't just for sleeping. They were furniture, inheritance, even status symbols. Wealthy people mentioned them in their wills. To my son Thomas, I leave the great feather bed with the blue hangings. You can almost hear the family fight already. One mainstream historical fact that always surprises people: most medieval households owned only one bed. The family shared it, sometimes across generations. Parents, children, and maybe even the occasional guest all piled in together. The phrase, sleep tight, likely comes from tightening the ropes that supported these beds, literally pulling the cords so the mattress didn't sag. If you forgot, you'd roll into the dip in the middle and spend the night wrestling for space. You run your fingers along the rope frame beneath you and feel the coarse fibers. They squeak faintly as you move. Above you a wooden canopy looms, designed not for decoration, but to stop bugs or cold drafts from dropping onto your face. The rich often hung curtains around the bed, trapping warmth and creating something close to privacy. The poor had to settle for tucking cloaks around themselves. It's odd to think that even kings and queens dealt with this same battle against the elements. There's a record from 13th century England describing how Henry III ordered his chamber to be warmed with braziers and strewn with fresh rushes before he slept. Royalty or not, the stone castle walls sucked out heat like a sponge. Imagine that, being the most powerful person in the realm and still waking up because your toes went numb. Of course, the truly bizarre part wasn't just what people slept on, but what shared their beds. Mice, and fleas were constant companions. In fact, one quirky little tidbit from the time: some servants were hired to warm the master's bed by lying in it first. Basically human hot water bottles. A few even joked about their side hustle as professional sleepers. You have to respect the hustle, even if it involved questionable hygiene. You stretch your legs and imagine what it must have felt like to crawl into something that smelled faintly of livestock and damp wool every night. You'd probably tell yourself it was cozy, the way we pretend our scratchy blanket from the laundry basket is just fine. The strange thing is, medieval people didn't necessarily see this as hardship. Sleep wasn't supposed to be luxurious. It was functional. Beds were tools like tables or stools. If you were comfortable enough to rest and didn't wake up frozen or bitten too badly, that was success. You glance around the small room and spot the family's children curled on rush mats near the hearth. The flickering light dances over their faces. One of them sleeps with a wooden toy clasped in his hand, the other with a cat curled at her feet. Even animals got their own sleeping spots, sometimes better than people's. Cows, pigs, and goats were often kept in attached rooms to share body heat. The smell, you can imagine, but warmth wins over pride when it's snowing outside. Historians still argue whether medieval beds were really that uncomfortable, or whether we just project our standards backward. Some museum reconstructions suggest that, when freshly filled and properly bound, a straw tick could be surprisingly springy. Maybe your ancestors slept better than you'd think, until the straw broke down, of course. You stand up and brush off stray bits of hay clinging to your tunic. The light through the shutters grows brighter, softer, carrying that faint scent of smoke and fresh air. You can hear distant bells tolling, some monastery signaling morning prayers. For them, bed comfort was irrelevant. Monks often slept on simple wooden boards, sometimes wrapped in rough wool robes. The idea was to avoid pleasure altogether. Sleep was a concession, not a treat. For the rest of society, though, beds became miniature worlds. Couples whispered secrets in them. Sick people clung to them. Babies were born and elders died in them. Some people even conducted business from them, literally holding court in bed. There are records of kings receiving ambassadors while propped up on pillows, half under a blanket. Imagine traveling for weeks to meet a ruler and finding him lounging like he's binge watching something. You reach down and pull at the edge of the straw tick again, curious about how it feels. It's rough, but not unbearable. You lie back, close your eyes, and imagine yourself sinking into it. The smell of dried grass is oddly soothing, a reminder of fields and sunlight. Maybe this is why, despite all its flaws, people still found peace here. Then again, there's that unmistakable itch. You scratch absent-mindedly and tell yourself it's nothing. Definitely not fleas. Probably. The fire crackles again, and for a moment you think about how fragile all of this is. The fine line between comfort and chaos. A stray spark, a spilled candle, and your bed could go up like a torch. Fire was the great enemy of sleep, which is why people often kept a bucket of water or sand nearby. Some households even had strict bedtime routines for extinguishing candles, whispered prayers for protection from the flame and the thief. You roll to your side and think of the feather beds, soft, rare, and luxurious. They must have felt like floating, but even they had problems. Feathers escaped, poked through the seams, and had to be beaten back into shape daily. Servants used long wooden paddles called bedstaffs to fluff them up. Basically the medieval version of karat, chopping your pillow. There's an old English phrase, don't let the bed bugs bite. It's not a modern joke. Those bugs were very real. People sprinkled herbs like lavender or wormwood into the straw to repel pests, and some even smoked their bedding with incense. Not because it smelled nice, but because it killed things. If your bed didn't smell like a forest fire, were you even trying? As daylight strengthens, you start to feel oddly fond of this world. It's dirty, uncomfortable, and deeply human. There's something grounding about imagining a life where the simple act of lying down was a small triumph. You think of all the hands that stuffed straw, mended ticks, and tucked blankets under sleeping children. Each gesture, humble and repetitive, was a quiet form of care. Maybe that's why, even today, we still use the same motion, pulling a blanket over someone we love, as a universal sign of comfort. You close your eyes again, listening to the faint sounds of a village waking. The rhythm of hammers, a rooster, the creak of wooden wheels outside. The straw beneath you crackles softly, and you let the roughness fade into a kind of background music. Because maybe, just maybe, comfort isn't about softness. Maybe it's about familiarity, the smell, the sound, the ritual of it all. And as your breathing evens out, you start to drift again, imagining yourself floating between time periods, half medieval, half modern, somewhere in that warm, itchy space where history feels almost alive. You wake again, not to an alarm, but to a sound you can't quite place. A soft grunt, a shifting of weight, and the unmistakable sensation of someone else's elbow gently nudging into your ribs. You blink your eyes open and realize the bed is crowded. Not just with you and your straw tick, but with two other humans, a snoring old man you don't remember inviting, and possibly a dog who's claimed the warmest spot near your feet. Welcome to the great bed sharing habit, a medieval sleep tradition that'll make you grateful for every square inch of your own mattress. You glance around. The room is dim but alive with slow, synchronized breathing. A child mumbles something in their dreams. The old man coughs and rolls over, muttering about blasted drafts. Somewhere near your knee the dog twitches, chasing phantom rabbits in its sleep. You're not in some hostel or disaster shelter. This is normal life in the Middle Ages. Beds were scarce, space was precious, and warmth was everything. Sharing a bed wasn't just convenient, it was survival. Fireplaces were unreliable, houses were drafty, and insulation was practically non-existent. Your body heat was the medieval equivalent of central heating. The more bodies in the bed, the better. You shift slightly, trying not to disturb anyone, and find yourself wedged between a stranger and a wall. That stranger, maybe a traveling merchant or a farmhand who stopped by for the night. Medieval inns often offered what was called a common bed. Travelers paid for a spot, not a room, not a mattress, just a literal space on a shared bed. You could find yourself lying beside anyone, a nobleman, a blacksmith, a monk on pilgrimage, or a suspiciously talkative bard who smelled faintly of mead and regret. The etiquette was simple. Don't kick, don't snore too loud, and above all, don't steal the covers. And yet, people wrote complaints about blanket thieves. Even back then, one 14th century letter from an English traveler complains that the fellow at my side did roll himself thrice and left me naught but straw. Some things never change. You turn your head slightly and imagine the sounds of an inn. The wooden floor creaks with each step. From another room comes laughter, a mug slamming on a table, the faint tune of a lute. The smell of owl sweat and smoke mingles thickly in the air. Beds line the walls, some with curtains, most without. Strangers snore side by side like mismatched puzzle pieces, their dreams bumping into one another in the dark. Historians still argue whether this kind of communal sleeping built camaraderie or just collective discomfort. Some suggest that sharing a bed broke down social barriers. Others think it did the opposite, forcing the lower classes into servitude even while resting. One thing's clear, privacy was a rare and often suspicious concept. If you wanted to sleep alone, people might assume you were hiding something, illness, secrets, or worse, witchcraft. And that's not exaggeration. There's a recorded case from 15th century Germany where a widow who insisted on sleeping alone was accused of consorting with demons. Her defense: she snored too loudly for anyone to bear. You can imagine the courtroom scene. But back in your crowded bed, you're far from alone. The air is heavy with shared warmth, sweat, and the faint smell of hay. The old man beside you snores again, long and rattling, like a dying set of bellows. You try to breathe quietly, thinking maybe this is how community feels, loud, close, and unavoidable. The wealthy had their own version of this. Even nobles often shared beds, not with random travelers but with servants, bodyguards, or attendants. A noblewoman might have her maid sleep beside her to fetch things during the night or to guard her jewelry. In some cases, it was considered improper for a noble to sleep without company. The empty bed was seen as eerie, like a stage waiting for a tragedy. In royal households, things got even stranger. The king's great bedchamber often contained multiple smaller beds for attendants. Henry V, for example, rarely slept alone. His closest courtiers shared the room, if not the mattress. The idea of a royal bed was political as much as personal, a space for ceremony, conversation, and sometimes the morning briefing before anyone even had breakfast. There's even a famous artifact called the Great Bed of Ware, built around 1590. It was more than 3 meters wide and reportedly fit 4 couples at once. That's not luxury, that's chaos. Guests at inns would brag about having slept in it, sometimes even carving their names into its wooden frame like they'd survived an adventure. You can almost hear one saying, "Yes, my good man, I spent the night in that bed," with all the pride of someone showing off a roller coaster ticket. You shift your position again, trying not to disturb anyone, but the dog takes this as an invitation to climb onto your chest. You sigh, pat its head, and feel its weight settle, warm and oddly comforting. It's not so bad, you think. There's a kind of rhythm to this. The closeness, the quiet mumbling, the shared exhaustion. It's messy, but human. A quirky little tidbit in colder regions. People sometimes invited chickens or even small pigs into bed for warmth. Yes, pigs. You'd cover them with straw or cloth and treat them like organic heating devices. The phrase "snug as a pig in a blanket" may have literal medieval roots. Imagine rolling over at midnight and finding a snout pressed against your cheek. You chuckle quietly, earning a sleepy grunt from the old man beside you. You whisper an apology. He snores in reply, a universal signal of forgiveness. It's fascinating, though, how this simple act of sharing a bed reflected an entire worldview. People weren't obsessed with personal space yet. They lived communally, ate communally, slept communally. Privacy didn't really exist until architecture made it possible. The bedroom as a concept, 4 walls, 1 bed, 1 person, wouldn't become standard until the 18th or 19th century. Before that, sleep was social. You think of all the small moments that must have happened in those crowded beds. Quiet conversations whispered between half-awake friends. Secrets traded in the dark. A hand reaching out to check if someone was still breathing. The intimacy of simply existing next to someone else in silence. Still, you can't ignore the downside. Parasites thrived in shared bedding and colds spread fast. If one person sneezed, the rest woke coughing by morning. Doctors warned against foul vapors from breath mixing in close quarters, but necessity won over medicine. You had to choose between freezing alone or sweating together. Historians note that travelers sometimes preferred sleeping outdoors to avoid such beds. In one 15th century diary, an English merchant wrote, "The inn was full, and I took my rest beneath the cart, which was less crowded and less noisy." You can almost feel his relief, and maybe his stiff neck the next day. The fire in your imagined inn crackles softly now. Someone gets up to stir it, shuffling past your bed with a candle in hand. The flickering light catches tired faces, people who'll never know you, yet who feel oddly familiar. You realize that for all the discomfort, there's something deeply connective about this picture of medieval sleep. It's chaotic, yes, but it's also a portrait of community, the nightly act of trusting others enough to drift into unconsciousness beside them. As dawn creeps in, you sense the first stirrings of morning chatter. Someone groans and stretches. Another yawns so loudly it's almost musical. The old man beside you mutters about his back. You laugh under your breath. And maybe, just maybe, you understand them a little better now. The medieval night wasn't peaceful. It was crowded, noisy, and full of life. Yet in that noise there was safety, shared breath, shared warmth, shared dreams. You gently push the dog off your chest, rise from the straw and stretch. Your body aches but your mind feels light. You can almost hear the world outside waking, the bells, the roosters, the rhythm of another day beginning. And as you step away from the bed, you leave behind not just the smell of hay and humanity, but a small piece of history. A reminder that even something as ordinary as sleep once belonged to everyone together. You wake to the sound of rain on thatched roofs, soft and steady, like 1,000 fingers tapping at the edges of your dreams. The room smells faintly of smoke and damp straw, and somewhere nearby, someone coughs themselves awake. The world outside is dark gray, one of those mornings that feels like it never truly begins. You pull the blanket tighter, but the air still sneaks through every tiny crack in the wall. In a medieval home, warmth was a privilege, not a guarantee. For most people, cozy meant surviving the night without frostbite. The fireplace in the main hall, if your family was lucky enough to have one, was never allowed to go out completely. Its embers were life itself, the only barrier between comfort and cold misery. You can almost see it now, a single glowing coal nestled in ashes, carefully covered with peat or dung to keep it smoldering through the night. Yes, dung. You heard that right. Chow dung was an ancient multitool. It burned slowly, cheaply, and smelled only slightly less offensive than you'd imagine. People even collected it daily, drying it in neat patties under the sun. You might call it gross, they called it resourceful. If you were poor, your bed might have been no more than a straw-filled sack. Hence the term, hit the hay. And you would hit it, too, literally, to flatten the lumps and chase out the bugs. Fleas, lice, and other tiny nightmares were part of nightly life. You could spend hours trying to fall asleep only to be interrupted by what one medieval writer called the restless company of God's smaller creatures. To cope, people came up with creative strategies. Hanging herbs like lavender, mint, or wormwood near the bed was thought to repel pests, and bonus attract pleasant dreams. Some even tucked sprigs under their pillows. Historians still argue whether this was actually effective or just an early form of aromatherapy. But you can imagine the faint sweetness of crushed leaves with the smoky air. You sit up, wrapping the wool blanket around your shoulders, and notice the bed itself, a wooden frame with rope lattice holding up the mattress. If the ropes loosened, and they did often, you'd sag awkwardly in the middle like a deflated loaf. So, before sleep, people tightened them. That's where the old saying "sleep tight" comes from. Literal ropes, literal tension. Some beds were so small that families shared them in shifts. A mother might curl with her children while the father slept later after working late in the fields or the workshop. In noble houses, things looked a bit more luxurious. Canopies, feather mattresses, embroidered linens. But even those beds were shared, not necessarily with romantic partners but with servants, guests, or even officials. Sleeping was communal, not private. You think about that for a moment. How odd it feels to imagine strangers snoozing shoulder to shoulder. But in medieval thought, privacy was less important than survival. Warmth was shared. Safety was shared. It wasn't unusual to roll over at night and bump elbows with someone who wasn't technically family. Maybe that's why many medieval paintings show people sleeping in rows, blankets tucked neatly, faces peaceful. Of course, not everyone found peace. If you had the misfortune of living near a drafty window or cracked wall, winter nights could turn into endurance trials. People layered everything they owned: cloaks, tunics, even spare rugs. There were nights when you'd fall asleep with your breath freezing faintly above your face. And yet, somehow, they called it normal. You notice the flickering light again, the fire's woken up, fed with fresh wood. The smell changes instantly, sharper, warmer, more alive. Someone must have risen early to rekindle it. That person deserves a medal, or at least the first bowl of hot porridge. Fire wasn't just warmth, it was protection. Without it, darkness could feel endless. Medieval people were genuinely afraid of night's total blackness. Without candles or lanterns, stepping outside could feel like walking into the mouth of something enormous. Even the church described night as the domain of the devil, which, frankly, didn't make anyone sleep better. That fear gave rise to rituals. Before bed, some families traced a cross in the ashes of the fire for divine protection. Others murmured charms to keep out spirits. One old English rhyme went, "Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, bless the bed that I lie on." You can almost hear it whispered by firelight, half prayer, half superstition. But not all fear was spiritual. Fire itself was dangerous. Entire villages burned down because someone nodded off without banking the embers properly. So medieval law often required that curfew be observed. A literal covering of the fire, the curfew in French. When the town bell rang, it meant everyone had to smother their hearths for safety. It's funny, today curfew means staying inside. Back then it meant tucking your fire into bed. As rain softens outside, you imagine stepping into a grander chamber, the bedchamber of a noble. Here things look almost surreal compared to the peasant's hut. Heavy drapes, carved oak posts, and furs from fox or bear. Servants quietly move through the shadows, placing warm stones wrapped in cloth between sheets. Yes, early bed warmers. Some even filled metal pans with glowing coals and slid them across the mattress, though that sometimes ended with fire in a place you definitely don't want it. And there you see the master of the house, climbing into bed wearing a long linen shirt. His nightgown. Not the silky type you're imagining, this one's more like an oversized tunic. He might pull on a wool cap too. Everyone wore nightcaps, not for fashion but because heat escaped most quickly through the head. You'd look ridiculous but feel toasty. Still, luxury had limits. Sheets were rarely washed. Soap was expensive. Water was cold. Even in castles, hygiene was negotiable. A famous chronicler once remarked that Queen Elizabeth I changed her linen once a fortnight whether it needed it or not. So if you're picturing clean white sheets and lavender scent, adjust expectations accordingly. Yet despite it all, there's beauty here. The glow of firelight on stone walls, the sound of soft rain, the slow even breathing of others around you. Sleep, for all its discomforts, was still a small miracle, a nightly surrender in a world where survival was never promised. You lie back imagining yourself in one of those rope beds. The straw rustles. The warmth slowly creeps in. Somewhere nearby, a mouse scurries under the hearth. You almost smile, realizing that even in such hardship, people still found comfort in routine, tightening ropes, fluffing straw, whispering their evening prayers. And as your eyes begin to close again, one last thought floats through your mind. For all our modern comfort, maybe we've lost something simple. They slept hard, dreamed deeply, woke naturally. Their nights were imperfect, but they belonged to them. You wake again, but this time the light is gentler, a soft amber spilling through narrow slits in the shutters. The world hums faintly with morning sounds, a cartwheel creaking somewhere, the muffled cluck of hens, the sigh of someone stretching beside you. You rub your eyes and for a moment, you're not sure if you're still dreaming or already awake. Because this morning, you're not in a peasant's cottage or a noble's chamber. You're somewhere in between. A small manor house, perhaps. A world of middling comfort, where the people sleep neither in rags nor in velvet, but in something halfway human, linen shirts, wool blankets, and dreams that still remember the fields. It's early, but people here wake with purpose. Sleep was never meant to linger too long. The medieval mind saw idleness as a cousin of sin, and lying abed after dawn was something only nobles, or the truly lazy, could afford. You swing your legs off the mattress, the rush of cold air biting instantly, and your toes meet the hard, packed floor. Somewhere nearby, you hear the low whistle of the servant stoking the fire again. But before the day really begins, something happens. Something very human. The medieval stretch. You roll your shoulders, twist your spine, and groan softly, much like people have done for thousands of years. Except back then, there was a ritual to it. People would make the sign of the cross before their first full stretch, thanking God for raising them from the little death of sleep. Historians still argue whether this religious habit was a holdover from older, pagan traditions, the idea that sleep was a small kind of dying and waking was a daily resurrection. You can almost imagine it, the morning air cold, your breath visible, and your muscles remembering they exist. It's not holy, it's just human. You reach for a small cup near the hearth, lukewarm ale or watered wine, because medieval breakfast rarely included clean water. Most wells were risky, so people drank small beer, barely alcoholic but safer than water teeming with bacteria. You sip, grimace at the taste, and wonder how anyone ever found sleep after drinking that. Across the room, someone yawns loudly, one of those full-body yawns that feels half scream, half sigh. It's contagious, and soon everyone else joins in. That, too, was once considered meaningful. In old superstition, yawning opened a door in your soul, and evil spirits could slip in. So, polite people crossed themselves mid-yawn, just in case. Imagine your whole family yawning in unison, then frantically making the sign of the cross like a sleep-deprived dance troupe. And then, of course, there were the dreams. Everyone's talking about theirs. The first sleep and second sleep had their own dream logic. Visions after the first were thought to be confusing or deceptive, while those after the second were truer, clearer, more divine. You listen as a young woman recounts her vision of a black dog that spoke Latin. A bad omen, everyone agrees. Someone else dreamed of bread falling from the sky, which meant wealth, or possibly a wheat shortage. Interpretations were flexible like that. Dream manuals were actually a thing. Imagine a medieval BuzzFeed quiz, but for your subconscious. Dreamed of teeth falling out, you'll lose money. Dreamed of fish, you'll gain love. Monks and scholars copied long lists of meanings, often mixing biblical symbolism with folk belief. Some even claimed you could control your dreams by saying certain prayers before sleep, an early form of lucid dreaming, if you squint. You step outside now, and the chill wakes you fully. The grass is slick with dew, the sky pale blue-gray, and smoke rises lazily from nearby roofs. A couple of cows chew noisily in a pen. You take a deep breath, and it feels ancient, like you're inhaling the same cold that kissed faces 1,000 years ago. There's something grounding about this simplicity. The day begins because it must. People wake because light tells them to. There's no snooze button, no alarm melody, no glowing screen. Just sun, sound, and habit. Back inside, the talk shifts to the night before. Someone swears they saw a light in the woods. Another claims it was a wandering spirit. Ghost stories were common morning chatter in medieval homes, like how we gossip about dreams or bad Wi-Fi. Some nights were believed to belong to witches. Certain lunar phases where the veil between worlds thinned and sleep could make you vulnerable. So people took precautions. Hanging an iron key by the bed, placing salt in a corner, or turning shoes upside down, each had its own charm. And of course, there were the prayers. Every morning began with gratitude for surviving the night, because many didn't. Fires, illness, childbirth. Every dawn was a quiet victory. You move toward the basin, ready to wash your face. The water is freezing, sharp enough to jolt the last dream from your skull. Medieval people believed cold water strengthened the spirit, though you suspect it mostly strengthened the will to get it over with. As you splash your face, you catch your reflection in the rippling surface. It's distorted, like seeing a stranger in an old mirror. You blink once, twice, and then smile faintly. The house hums now. Bread is baking, someone's mending a tunic, another sharpens tools by the door. There's rhythm again. Work, food, conversation. You sit near the hearth, still wrapped in the remnants of sleep. And that's when the elderly woman beside you, the one who's lived through 40 winters, tells you something quietly. Sleep is when the world forgets itself. You look at her, not sure what she means, but somehow it fits. The medieval night was more than rest, it was a surrender. In a time without electric light, without constant chatter, Darkness wasn't just a lack of brightness. It was a realm of its own, where logic softened and time bent. People went to sleep expecting to dream, to think, to pray, to possibly see something. And when they woke, they returned to the practical, hungry, aching world. It's strange, our world feels more awake, but maybe less alive. We sleep in silence alone with locked doors and glowing screens. They slept in noise and company, and somehow found meaning in the cracks between waking and dreaming. Outside, the sky brightens further. The rooster crows again as if it's been doing this forever, which in a way it has. You take another sip of that watery ale, grimace again, and feel the last tendrils of the night slip away. And yet, a small part of you wishes you could stay half asleep a little longer. In that strange, timeless space where rain taps on the roof, the fire hums in the hearth, and the world feels old, slow, and kind. The rain finally clears by midday, leaving the air heavy with the smell of wet earth and chimney smoke. You step outside into that pale light, the kind that feels more like a sigh than a sunrise. The ground glistens, puddles mirror rooftops, and the cobblestones are slick enough to make every step a careful negotiation. But this world, muddy, slow, half-dreaming, is still alive, and so are its sleepers. You start walking toward the village square, passing by open doorways where people talk about last night's weather, last night's dreams, last night's noises. Because in a time before insulation, sleep wasn't private, it was a community event. Someone's snoring, someone's prayers, the restless shuffle of livestock outside, all of it wove together into the symphony of the medieval night. You hear snippets as you pass one man complaining of devil's footsteps on his roof, another blaming the wind. A mother tells her daughter not to whistle after dark, or the dead might come calling. You smile to yourself, wondering how much of that was superstition and how much was just comfort. Because sometimes it's easier to blame ghosts than bad weather. Historians still argue whether these nighttime fears were genuine or exaggerated. Sure, chroniclers loved drama, but records of night spirits span from Ireland to Italy. The line between sleep and haunting was thin, and sometimes the night's noises felt too strange to ignore. You pause near a baker's stall. The man is dusted in flour, half awake but smiling. He tells you about the night bakers. Those who stayed up after the first sleep to knead dough so the bread would be ready by dawn. It was exhausting work, but also strangely peaceful. The streets were quiet, the stars bright, and for a few hours, the world belonged only to them. You picture it now, a single lantern swinging in the dark, the rhythmic sound of dough slapping against the table, and the faint glow of ovens like heartbeats in the night. That was their lullaby, the warmth of the fire, the smell of rising bread, the steady work of hands that never stopped. Not far from the bakery, a church bell begins to toll, slowly, deliberately. It's time for matins, the early prayer. Monks across Europe structured their entire nights around these sacred hours. If you'd been inside a monastery, sleep would have come in short bursts, never long enough to dream deeply. You'd sleep, rise for prayer, sleep again, and rise once more. The night was a cycle of worship and wakefulness, a rhythm that blurred the edges between day and dark. One old chronicle from Cluny Abbey describes it beautifully. We sleep as the earth sleeps, but God wakes us with the bell, lest our souls grow too still. You can almost hear that bell now, faint and distant, echoing across the misty fields. The monks themselves had odd sleeping arrangements. Some lay on hard wooden pallets, others on straw, always in their robes, never fully undressed. Modesty, discipline, and humility, all while trying not to snore too loudly next to Brother Gregory. And yes, even monks complained about snoring. There are actual letters from abbots asking monks to curb their nocturnal noises, which feels hilariously relatable. You wander toward the edge of the village, where a few huts lean into the slope of a small hill. Smoke rises lazily from chimneys, and a group of women sit together spinning wool. They greet you, then start chatting about something oddly specific, the sleeping saints. You lean closer, intrigued. Apparently, some holy men and women were said to sleep so deeply during visions that they appeared dead. In one story, a nun was found motionless for 3 days, and when she awoke, she claimed to have walked in the gardens of heaven. Scholars later tried to explain these as epileptic episodes or trances, but to medieval minds, it was proof of divine touch. And you realize, sleep wasn't just rest, it was mystical, even dangerous. People believed the soul wandered while you slept, traveling through dreams or even leaving the body entirely. That's why sudden awakenings were feared. Startling someone awake could, in theory, trap their soul outside. Imagine that excuse for oversleeping. Sorry, my soul's still out walking. But if sleep was sacred, so was waking. The act of opening one's eyes each morning was a ritual of gratitude. You can almost hear it now, the quiet murmuring of prayers, the gentle shuffle of people beginning their daily tasks. Everything unfolds slowly, organically, no alarm clocks, no rush. As you keep walking, the road widens into open countryside. A shepherd waves from afar, his sheep scattered like little white commas across the hills. He tells you he sleeps out here sometimes under the stars, wrapped in a cloak thick enough to fight the dew. The sky, he says, keeps him company. The stars blink like tired eyes of angels. You lie down in the grass beside him, just for a moment. The ground is damp, but it smells alive. Above you the clouds part, revealing a blue so clean it almost hurts to look at. You close your eyes, imagining what it must have felt like to live in a world where night and day were partners, not enemies. The shepherd hums a soft tune, an old ballad about sleep itself. Something about a king who fell into eternal rest until true love's voice called him back. The melody drifts with the wind, light and haunting. You feel your breathing slow, your mind quieting. And then you remember another peculiar medieval habit, prayer naps. In some monasteries, monks believed that falling asleep while praying wasn't a failure. It was divine approval. If your soul was truly at peace, sleep was the body's natural reward. So yes, even in the 1300s, people managed to nap on the job and call it holy. As the afternoon deepens, you rise again. Brushing off the grass, you walk back toward the village, where life hums in slow motion. It's strange, after spending so much time among these people. You start to feel their rhythm sinking into your bones. Sleep isn't something they schedule. It's something that simply happens, woven through work, weather, and worship. You pass by the baker again, now handing out loaves warm enough to steam in your hands. You take one, break it, and feel that simple joy, the taste of earth and effort, of long nights and early mornings. And somewhere in the back of your mind, you hear it again, that faint toll of a bell, reminding you that time, like sleep, never really stops. It just folds back on itself, one cycle melting into another, one dream slipping quietly into the next. By the time twilight rolls around again, the village feels different, hushed, heavy, almost holding its breath. The puddles from this morning's rain have faded, but the air still carries that metallic chill that seeps into your bones. You watch as smoke thickens above rooftops and doors begin to close one by one, sealing families back into their nightly rituals. It's a slow retreat from daylight, like the whole world pulling up its blanket. Inside one of those homes, a woman lights a tallow candle. The flame wobbles at first, weak and yellow, then steadies as she shields it with her hand. The smell, animal fat, a little sour, a little sweet, fills the small space. It's the smell of night, of routine. The children yawn, the father banks the fire, and the mother mutters something about the witching hour. You sit quietly, watching, feeling how the evening itself changes the air. The light softens, voices grow lower, and everything starts to slow. Sleep isn't just coming, it's arriving like a tide. People of the Middle Ages knew this rhythm by heart. They might not have had clocks, but they knew when the shadows reached the floorboards just so, it was time to prepare. And their preparations were peculiar, to say the least. For instance, it wasn't uncommon to recite a rhyme or charm before bed. Some were gentle blessings, God give me rest and angels guard my dreams. Others, a bit darker, if the dead pass by my door, let them go silent evermore. The words rolled off tongues worn by superstition, faith, and fatigue. Historians still argue whether these bedtime charms were born from Christianity or older pagan roots. Maybe both, but you can imagine how comforting it must have felt to say something into the dark before surrendering to it. The family in front of you settles in. The youngest child gets tucked under a coarse blanket stuffed with wool. The mother crosses herself, then whispers to the fire, "Stay." It's a small word but full of meaning. If the fire lived, the night was kinder. You watch her drop a heavy iron cover over the hearth to keep embers glowing safely. That moment, the faint clang, the dimming red, marks the real start of medieval night. Outside, the streets fall completely silent, except for the faint whistle of wind through narrow alleys. You decide to step out for a moment. The sky above is vast and impossibly dark. No street lamps, no glow from distant cities. Just the moon, proud and alone, lighting the thatched roofs like silver. Your eyes adjust slowly, and stars appear, so many stars that it feels like you're floating in them. You can understand why medieval people treated the night as alive. They looked up and saw order in the chaos. Constellations that told stories, guided travelers, warned of storms. One of those stars, they believed, was St. Peter's own lantern, a heavenly night watchman. You keep walking, your shoes crunching softly on frost-kissed ground. Somewhere nearby, a dog barks once, then falls silent. From a small window you hear faint singing. Someone's voice, maybe a mother's lullaby, drifts out into the cold sleep. Little dove, the stars keep thee, dream soft, dream deep, till dawn shall free. It's off-key, but beautiful in its sincerity. You imagine hundreds of homes humming the same tune across villages, across countries, across centuries. For all their fear of darkness, they also found tenderness in it. You pause near a small chapel on the edge of town. Its door is slightly ajar, candlelight flickering inside. You peek in and see an old priest half dozing at his desk, his head bobbing like a pendulum. He's supposed to be copying a psalm, but the warmth of the candle and the lateness of the hour have conspired against him. His quill drifts lower, and then smudges a perfect ink blot. You smile. Even the holiest couldn't resist sleep's pull. In one corner, a stone statue of an angel watches silently. The flickering light makes it look almost alive. You remember reading that in some villages, people prayed to their guardian angels before sleep, asking them to keep nightmares away. But others feared that too much prayer might attract attention from things that answered back. So it was always a careful balance, enough faith to be safe, not enough to be noticed. You step back outside, exhaling into the cold. Your breath hangs briefly before fading, and you think about all those nights that came before this one. The countless people who looked up at this same moon, whispered the same prayers, tucked into the same kind of straw. Sleep for them wasn't a health goal, it was survival, and yet it carried poetry. As you walk back toward the main road, you see a farmhouse with a small loft window glowing faintly. Inside, an old man sits awake by the fire. He's talking to no one in particular, maybe his late wife, maybe himself. People often spoke to the dead at night, believing they could listen best between midnight and dawn. He says softly, "I'll sleep soon, love." Just watching the fire a bit longer, you feel the weight of that tenderness, quiet and human. It's the kind of thing no history book can truly capture, the ache of missing someone in the stillness of night. You find your own place to rest now, inside a small barn behind the inn. The straw smells sweet and dusty. Somewhere above, a pigeon rustles in the rafters. You stretch out and listen. The world has gone still again, except for the soft breathing of animals. And there it is, that familiar hum of the medieval night. The same one that carried prayers, secrets, and dreams for centuries. You close your eyes, the quiet pressing in like velvet. You think about how fragile sleep used to be, how easily it could be broken by hunger, illness, fear, or noise. And yet, despite all that, they managed to find rest. Maybe not peaceful every time, but real. You breathe in. The air is cold, the straw rustles under your hand. Somewhere in the distance, an owl calls once, then twice, then stops. And as your mind drifts towards sleep, one last thought settles in for them. Night wasn't the absence of light. It was a world of its own. When morning creeps back into that same village, it does so quietly, like a cat stretching on a windowsill. You blink your eyes open to a dull gray light filtering through cracks in the barn wall. The air still smells faintly of straw and last night's smoke. A rooster somewhere out of sight yells his opinion of the dawn, and just like that, the medieval world stirs again. You rise, brushing straw from your clothes, and notice that the village feels groggy, half awake, half dreaming. The first wave of movement isn't people rushing to work but people stretching, rubbing their eyes, and murmuring about what they saw in their sleep. In this world, dreams aren't private, they're conversation starters. You step out into the misty lane and hear two women talking at a well. One says, "I dreamed of a white dog last night," to which the other gasps softly, as though that means something tragic. And to them it does. Dream symbols are their version of Google search results, cryptic, open to interpretation, and sometimes wildly inaccurate. Historians still argue whether medieval dream books, those strange manuals that claim to decode visions, were meant for genuine belief or just entertainment. One popular guide from the 14th century promised that dreaming of fish meant money was coming your way, while dreaming of shoes meant betrayal. Which seems unfair to shoes, honestly, but you can imagine the comfort it brought. In a life ruled by chance, plague, war, weather, a dream felt like a message, maybe even a clue that something mattered. You wander further, and by the time you reach the edge of town, the sun is higher. Farmers are already heading to the fields. Their faces are blank with fatigue. Some slept in awkward bundles, some not at all. Sleep was not guaranteed, especially if you lived near livestock or near people who snored louder than the livestock. Still, even the most exhausted among them clung to the belief that sleep had spiritual weight. It wasn't just rest, it was a rehearsal for death. "To sleep is to die a little," said an old proverb. You can almost hear monks muttering it under their breath in monasteries, clutching their rosaries before they turned in. Inside one of those monasteries, far from this village, a different rhythm plays out. You picture its stone walls, flickering oil lamps, the faint echo of sandals against flagstones. A bell rings in the early hours, calling the brothers to matins, the first prayer of the day, sometimes before sunrise. Imagine you're there now. The air smells of cold stone and beeswax. You shuffle in behind a row of drowsy monks. They're wrapped in coarse habits, some yawning discreetly. And as the chant begins low and steady, you realize this is their version of a lullaby in reverse. Music not to fall asleep to, but to stay awake through. The monks' sleeping habits were as disciplined as their faith. Many slept sitting upright in wooden stalls to avoid sinful comfort. Some even used ropes tied around their chests to prevent lying flat, too close to a corpse's pose, they thought. Yet, in the deep hours, they often drifted into brief, sacred naps, little spiritual power downs between prayers. You can't help but grin. Humans, no matter how pious, will always find a way to sneak in a nap. Stepping back outside in your mind, you imagine the rest of the countryside waking up. Bakers fire their ovens, smiths hammer iron. Mothers sweep thresholds while humming to themselves. Yet, beneath all that routine, sleep still lingers in their bones. People believed in sleep demons. 2. Tiny spirits that could crawl into your mouth if you slept open-mouthed, or steal your voice for the day if you turned the wrong way on your straw pallet. Some households hung dried herbs above their beds, lavender, rosemary, or St. John's wort, believed to ward off evil spirits and bad dreams. And then there's the quirky part. Many families shared their sleeping spaces not just with each other but with animals. Chickens tucked into corners, dogs curled under blankets, and even pigs, useful heating systems with snouts. The concept of personal space simply didn't exist. You picture it a small cottage room, smoky and warm, where everyone from grandpa to the family goat snores in rhythm. Somewhere, a child wakes and says, "Mama, the rooster's dreaming again," as it clucks in its sleep. And yet, amid the absurdity, there's something deeply communal about it. Sleep wasn't a private luxury, it was a shared state of being. The village slept together, dreamed together, woke together. You walk through this vision, listening to the echoes of snoring, the crackling fires, the distant prayers. You realize that while our modern world isolates sleepers in locked bedrooms and climate control, there's bound them together under the same drafty roof. In that shared warmth, superstition thrived. For instance, if someone died in their sleep, people would open every window immediately to let the soul out. Others would cover mirrors, because if the soul saw its reflection, it might get confused and stay. There's one fringe tale that medieval peasants whispered if you woke suddenly between midnight and 1, you might glimpse the night procession, a ghostly parade of souls crossing the fields. Some said they were warriors doomed to march forever, others claimed they were just restless dreamers caught between worlds. You imagine standing there one night, seeing flickers of movement through the mist, torches that vanish when you blink. A chill runs through you, but then you laugh softly. You remind yourself that people back then lived by candlelight. A little shadow could become a whole legend. Still, part of you wonders. The scholar in you wants logic. The dreamer in you likes the mystery, and both sides agree that the human need to make sense of night is eternal. The village fades as you walk, and the world expands into rolling hills and quiet woods. You pass a small pond, its surface smooth as glass. Peasants believed reflections at night were dangerous, that if you look too long, the water might remember your face and steal your sleep for weeks. You crouch, glance once, then stand quickly, no sense tempting the local folklore. Further on, a shepherd dozes under a tree, his flock grazes lazily nearby. You notice he's wearing a cloak lined with herbs, wormwood and thyme, an old sleep charm against nightmares. You almost envy the simplicity of it. Who needs melatonin gummies when you can smell like a medieval spice rack? As the sun dips again, fatigue wraps around you too. The landscape seems to shimmer in that golden hour when day blurs into evening. You feel the day's stories tugging at your eyes, pulling you back toward rest. And once again, you realize the medieval world lived in a loop of sleep and wake that blurred boundaries. Dreams leaked into reality, fears shaped rituals, and the night, though full of danger, was also full of strange comfort. You find yourself back at the edge of that village, watching the same smoke rise from chimneys, hearing the same lullabies hum through the air. The rhythm repeats, unbroken. And somewhere inside, you sense that for all our electric lights and digital clocks, we're still not so different. We still chase sleep, fear the dark, and talk about our dreams over breakfast. You yawn, stretch, and smile to yourself. Maybe tonight you'll dream of monks and firelight, of shoes and fish and wandering souls. Just don't tell anyone about the white dog. By the time twilight returns, you've grown used to the rhythm of this medieval world, the slow inhale of day, the long exhale of night. You walk once more through the narrow village lanes as the last streaks of sunlight vanish behind distant hills. The houses seem to shrink into themselves again, each doorway flickering with faint, nervous light. But tonight, you're heading somewhere different, the manor on the hill. It's not grand by modern standards, but compared to the peasant cottages, it feels almost royal. Stone walls, narrow stained glass windows, and a gate that groans like it resents being touched. You push through, and immediately, you sense its wealth smells different. It smells of beeswax polish and burning cedar instead of goat and smoke. Inside, the Lord's household is preparing for bed in its own peculiar way. Servants rush through corridors carrying buckets of warm water, sheets and, most curious of all, bowls of herbs. You follow one into the ladies' chamber, where the bed looks like a small architectural project. 4 tall posts, heavy drapes, layers of linen and wool. It's less a place to sleep than a fortress against cold and insects. She sits at her mirror brushing her hair. 200 strokes, she says proudly. Her maid tells her it keeps nightmares away. Historians still argue whether that was a superstition or just early skincare marketing. Meanwhile, the Lord himself sits near the fire, boots off, staring into the flames like he's trying to read them. He mutters about taxes, rain, and his aching back, proof that no amount of privilege spares you from nightly overthinking. You could almost imagine him saying, "I should have bought more sheep," before sighing and reaching for his goblet of watered-down wine. This household has its own bedtime rhythm. The servants sleep in the hall, rolled in blankets, feet toward the dying fire. The lord and lady retreat behind their curtains where privacy, rare in any century, finally exists. But even here, the dark carries superstition. You overhear a servant whispering as she snuffs a candle, "Keep the door cracked, or the spirits can't leave." Another replies, "If they can't leave, maybe they'll keep watch." And just like that, you realize that even among the rich, logic and folklore share the same bed. You linger as the manor quiets. The fire snaps, then settles. The great hall glows orange, then fades to black. In that dim hush, you feel time stretch out, centuries folding into one long night. You wander upstairs, curiosity guiding you. There, you find a small chamber belonging to the Lord's youngest daughter. She's about 8, curled beneath a canopy embroidered with stars. Her nurse sits beside her, telling a bedtime story. Once, the nurse begins, there was a knight who never slept. He feared that if he closed his eyes, he'd miss his chance to serve the king. But one night, he fell asleep by accident and woke in heaven. The child giggles. Was it a nice heaven? The nurse nods. Very. But only because he'd finally rested. You smile. It's a simple story, yet it hints at something profound. Sleep wasn't weakness. It was reward. Outside, the wind rises, pressing against the shutters. You think of all the people across this landscape, each surrendering to night in their own way. Peasants wrapped in straw, monks in cold cells, nobles behind velvet curtains. Every one of them vulnerable in their rest, trusting that the world will still be there when they wake. And then thud. You jump slightly. A small sound from downstairs. Maybe a door. Maybe a log shifting in the hearth. But your heart beats faster, and you realize how easy it was for fear to thrive in this kind of darkness. There's no switch to flood the room with light, no comforting hum of appliances. Only shadows that move when your eyes do. You can understand why people in the Middle Ages believed night had rules of its own. That after the 9th bell, the world belonged to other things. You head back down the stairs, careful not to wake anyone. The hall feels alive now, like it's breathing. The fire's embers pulse faintly, painting the room in slow flashes of red. You hear the wind whisper through cracks in the stone, and for a moment, it sounds almost like voices. You shake your head. Too many ghost stories, you think. Still, you remember a tale told by travelers, a story about the night maid, a spirit said to wander manors, smoothing beds and tightening curtains for those who treated their servants kindly, and stealing pillows from those who didn't. A sort of spectral housekeeper with strong opinions about hospitality. It's silly maybe, but the world you're walking through doesn't separate the silly from the sacred. Everything blends together in the candlelight. You return to the barn outside, your makeshift resting place, and lie down again. The straw rustles, and you can smell faint smoke from the manor chimneys. You stare up at the rafters, tracing patterns of shadow and imagining all the beds across the countryside filled with dreamers. And then it hits you, the scale of it. Every night, millions of people through time have done this exact thing, crawled into whatever counted as a bed, whispered a thought to no one in particular, and drifted off. Kings, beggars, monks, and children, all united by the act of closing their eyes. That thought feels strangely comforting, but just as you start to drift off yourself, the world inside your head changes again. Suddenly you're in someone else's dream, a baker's maybe. You're standing in a field of giant loaves, steam rising like fog, when one of them opens its mouth and says, "You forgot the salt." You jolt awake laughing. Dream logic, apparently, has always been this ridiculous. People in the Middle Ages believed dreams could predict everything from love to war. The Lord's wife might wake one morning and declare, "I dreamed of lilies. Someone's getting married." The priest might warn her that lilies also meant death. Interpretations were endless, because the unknown is a playground for imagination. You roll over, smiling to yourself. The straw scratches, the night hums, and above it all, the stars burn faintly. The same stars the lady embroidered into her canopy. The same ones monks prayed under. The same ones peasants saw through their smoke holes. You close your eyes again, listening to that faraway world breathe. The wind moves through it like a sigh. You think, not for the first time, that maybe history isn't dead. It just dreams differently than we do. You breathe out long and slow. Somewhere a rooster mumbles in its sleep, confused about the time, and as the dark folds around you once more, you sink into it willingly. Morning again, but this time the air feels softer, lighter, like the world itself is yawning after a deep, strange dream. You sit up, brushing straw from your sleeve, and watch a faint beam of sunlight crawl across the barn wall. Dust dances in it lazily, each speck glowing like a memory that refuses to settle. You stretch, step outside, and the world greets you with dew. The grass glistens like it's been dipped in glass, and the village seems peaceful. For once, no arguments, no distant clanging, just the slow murmur of a place easing into the day. But even in daylight, sleep lingers in conversation. Two men outside the tavern talk in low voices. One says, "Dreamt I was chased by a black goat." The other laughs nervously. "Careful, that means debt." They both nod, entirely serious. You pass them quietly, realizing that for these people, dreams are currency, traded, analyzed, half feared, half trusted. Historians still argue whether medieval people really believed in dream prophecy or simply used it as morning gossip. Either way, it gave shape to uncertainty. Life back then was full of unknowns, so a dream, even a strange one, felt like something you could hold on to. As you walk toward the village square, you notice another group gathered by the church steps. A traveling friar is preaching, his voice rising with energy that feels too early for the hour. Sleep, he shouts, is both a blessing and a danger. The devil works best when eyes are shut, the crowd murmurs. Some nod, others yawn. You stifle a laugh. It's hard to take warnings about sin seriously when half your audience is still half asleep. But his message carries an interesting truth. Medieval Christians often feared night not just for its physical darkness but for its moral one. Evil, they said, hid best when the candles went out. To fall asleep without prayer was to leave your soul unlocked. You imagine the friar making his rounds, warning villagers to purify their beds with holy water, to never sleep on their backs lest demons perch on their chests. And yet, later that night, even he will crawl under his thin blanket, sigh, and drift off like everyone else, probably snoring. As the day brightens, you leave the village behind and follow a dirt path through the fields. The air smells of damp earth and bread baking somewhere unseen. Every so often, you spot a figure in the distance, a shepherd napping on a hill, a woman kneeling to weed her garden, her head drooping as she steals a quick rest. You start noticing how sleep weaves through their lives, not as a single nightly event, but as small pauses scattered throughout the day. Short naps between tasks, a doze while waiting for dough to rise. The medieval body learned to take what it could get. And that brings you to a peculiar detail, sleep benches. Some houses built narrow wooden ledges near fireplaces, half seats, half beds, for light naps. Imagine perching on one warm and smoky, drifting halfway between awareness and dream. They didn't call it meditation, but maybe it was. You wander further, your thoughts meandering with you. The sun climbs higher, and birds flit between hedges. The simplicity of this world feels oddly restorative. No endless to-do lists, no screens buzzing at midnight, just the natural rhythm of exhaustion and recovery. Eventually, you reach the ruins of an old priory. The walls still stand, though roofless, and wildflowers bloom where the floor once was. You step carefully over fallen stones and feel the hush of the place sink into your bones. It's easy to imagine monks moving through here centuries ago, chanting, whispering, sleeping in narrow cells. In one corner, a slab of stone still bears faint carvings, symbols of stars and moons. You run your fingers over them and realize this was once a dormitory. It's strange how even sacred spaces carried sleep within them, as though rest itself was an act of worship. There's an old monastic saying, "Let your last thought before sleep be of God, and your first upon waking be of thanks." You whisper it softly to yourself, half out of respect, half curiosity. The words feel gentle, timeless, but not every dream in these walls would have been peaceful. Some monks wrote of nocturnal temptations, vivid, unsettling dreams they believed were sent by demons. To them, even the mind wasn't safe once the body rested. You picture one, perhaps a young scribe, waking with a start in the darkness, heart pounding. He grips his rosary, whispering prayers, trying to untangle sin from dream. Historians still debate whether such accounts were genuine visions or simply guilt given shape by candlelight and isolation. But either way, it's clear, even holiness couldn't protect you from your own imagination. You linger there a while, listening to the wind hum through broken arches. There's something soothing about ruins. They remind you that everything, even fear, fades eventually. As dusk begins to return, you wander back toward civilization. A tavern door opens, spilling laughter and the smell of ale. Inside, villagers sit shoulder to shoulder, their fatigue melting in the warm air. Someone strums a lute, off-key but heartfelt. You take a seat, order nothing, just listen. "Did you hear?" One man says, "that in France, people sleep twice a night?" The others blink. "Twice," he says, proud of the rumor. "They sleep a few hours, wake to pray or other things." He smirks, then sleep again till dawn. The group chuckles. Someone raises a cup. You smile. He's not wrong. Many medieval Europeans practiced what scholars now call segmented sleep. They'd rest for a few hours after dusk, wake in the middle of the night, then drift off again till morning. During that quiet in-between, people prayed, read, talked, or, well, made more people. It's an oddly civilized system when you think about it. You can picture those in-between hours quiet fires, murmured prayers, whispered gossip, the occasional flirtation in the dark. And maybe, as you sit here surrounded by their descendants, you realize that pattern still exists in a way, how we wake at 3 a.m., stare at the ceiling, scroll our phones, and tell ourselves it's just insomnia. Maybe we're simply remembering something ancient. The tavern laughter swells, and you feel the warmth of it, the humanity of it. The night outside deepens, and once again the world tilts toward rest. When you finally step out, the sky is a sheet of black velvet. The moon hangs low, fat and silver. you walk slowly, letting the sounds of the tavern fade behind you until only the crickets remain. You think about how fragile their sleep was, and yet how full of ritual and meaning. They feared demons, trusted herbs, prayed, whispered, sang, and still, every night they closed their eyes anyway. That, you think, is courage in its quietest form. You wake to rain, the soft, persistent kind that doesn't so much fall as linger. The air smells of wet earth and wood smoke, and somewhere nearby, a bell tolls faintly through the mist. You pull your cloak tighter and watch droplets ripple through a puddle, each ring fading like a forgotten dream. It's another medieval morning, though you can barely tell the hour. The sky is gray, the fields are shrouded, and the villagers move slower today. Rain, after all, gives them permission to rest a little longer, to stretch out their mornings under wool blankets and postpone the day's chores. You wander past a cottage where someone's still asleep by the hearth. Their arm hangs limply off the straw mattress, a faint snore blending with the crackle of fire. You smile, sleep at last seems to be winning this round. But as you walk further, you notice a strange little custom. Outside a few doors, bundles of herbs hang from the eaves, wet and dripping, releasing a sharp, green scent. Wormwood, lavender, and mugwort. The rain intensifies their perfume until the air feels almost medicinal. A woman notices you looking and explains, keeps the bad dreams away, washes the sleep spirits clean. Her voice is matter of fact, like she's explaining how to salt fish, not exorcise invisible creatures. You nod politely, pretending you completely understand, but the historian in you is quietly delighted. Mugwort was once called the dream plant, used in charms and pillows meant to summon, or repel, visions. People believed it could open the mind's door between worlds. You walk on, imagining those small bundles swinging in the rain, guarding families from nightmares that may or may not have ever existed. It's superstition, sure, but also, in its own way, a form of comfort. And comfort is something everyone, rich or poor, chased at night. The rain drives you toward a small inn, and as you step inside, warmth greets you like an old friend. The air smells of stew, wet wool, and smoke. Travelers sit hunched over wooden bowls, eating slowly, steam curling around their faces. A dog sleeps near the fire, legs twitching mid-dream. You take a seat in a corner and listen. Conversations flow like the river outside, low, steady, and full of rumor. Said he saw the nightmare again, one man mutters. The others glance at him sharply. Don't say it too loud. You lean closer. The nightmare, that wasn't just a figure of speech. It was a creature of folklore, said to ride sleeping people, pressing down on their chests until they couldn't breathe. It's where the word nightmare actually comes from. Historians still argue whether the idea was born from sleep paralysis or pure imagination. But you can picture it easily, someone half awake, unable to move, heart pounding, feeling something unseen holding them down. In a world lit only by candles, how could that not become a story? The innkeeper crosses herself when she hears the word. Best not speak of her till dawn, she warns. Else she hears and comes. You resist the urge to test that theory. Instead, you order something warm to drink, a spiced all, probably the closest thing medieval people had to hot cocoa, and watch the window. The rain turns heavier, drumming a slow rhythm on the roof. The sound mingles with the murmurs, the occasional creak of wood, and the sigh of sleepers nodding off at their tables. There's something deeply cozy about it, like being inside a collective dream. The fire pops, someone hums a tune, the rain becomes part of the lullaby. Your thoughts drift again to how this age understood sleep as both sacred and strange. Some believed dreams were messages from saints or angels. Others thought they were temptations planted by darker forces. Still others said they were simply the body's way of clearing out excess, vapors, a very medieval way of describing REM cycles. And then there were those who took their dreams seriously enough to build their lives around them. You think of Hildegard of Bingen, the 12th century abbess who claimed to receive visions in her sleep, music, symbols, prophecies. Her writings inspired hymns and paintings, but also controversy. Was she blessed or simply brilliant? Historians still debate it. Yet as you listen to the rain, you imagine her in a stone cell somewhere, half asleep, seeing entire worlds bloom behind her eyes. You sip your all, lost in that image. When the innkeeper's voice breaks through, "You're not staying out there tonight, are you?" You shake your head. "I'll find a corner here." She nods approvingly. "Good. Rain like this brings the sleepless ones." You raise an eyebrow. "The sleepless ones." She lowers her voice. "Spirits that wander because they forgot how to rest. They drift through the fog, looking for someone warm to borrow dreams from." You glance toward the window again. The fog outside is thick enough to erase the world. For a fleeting second, you half expect to see faces moving in it. You smile faintly at your own imagination and pull your cloak tighter. The night deepens. The inn empties slowly as travelers head to their rooms one by one. You lie down near the fire, listening to the hiss of rain. The warmth seeps into your bones. You close your eyes, and soon the sounds blur: the crackle, the wind, the rhythmic patter overhead. But just before you drift off, you hear something faint. Footsteps. No, too light, more like a whisper sliding through the room. You open one eye. The fire's embers pulse gently. The dog sighs. Shadows flicker on the walls, nothing more. Still, you can't shake the feeling of company, the kind that isn't exactly physical. You remind yourself of the woman's words, the sleepless ones. You take a slow breath. If you're here, you mumble half aloud, keep quiet, and don't steal my dreams. And with that, you surrender to sleep again. Somewhere between history and imagination, comfort and unease. In your dream, you're walking through rain that never ends. Each drop reflects tiny scenes from other people's dreams. Monks chanting, peasants laughing, children hiding under blankets. You reach out to touch one and see your own reflection ripple across it. You laugh softly, even dreams have mirrors. When you wake, dawn has already come. The inn is quiet, the fire reduced to gray ash. The rain has stopped, leaving the air clean and still. You rise slowly, feeling that particular kind of calm that comes only after a night of strange dreams and safe shelter. You step outside. The world glistens. The puddles mirror the pale sky, and the herbs hanging from doors drip faintly, their scent sharp but sweet. For a moment you stand there breathing it all in. The night's fears, the morning's relief, the endless rhythm of human sleep and waking. Maybe that's the secret the medieval world knew and we forgot. Night isn't something to fight, it's something to share. You follow the morning light out of the misty village, boots pressing into soft mud that still remembers the rain. The path stretches ahead, winding through meadows where sheep graze quietly, their wool damp and glinting. It feels as though the whole world has just exhaled after a long night's dream. Your mind wanders, because how could it not? To the question that haunted every medieval sleeper, what really happens when you drift off? No one had words like REM cycle or melatonin. To them, sleep wasn't a biological function, it was a spiritual migration. You imagine yourself as one of those medieval thinkers, trying to make sense of the night. You'd have no clock, no blue glow of a phone, no caffeine to drag you past midnight. You'd have candles that burn low, a body tuned to darkness, and a faith that insisted every moment of rest might be divine. And so in your imagination you step into a monastery. It's silent, too silent. The stone hallways echo only your footsteps, and the air smells faintly of wax and damp parchment. Monks move slowly in the half-light, robes brushing the floor. You can tell they've already been awake for hours. The faint murmur of their morning prayers hums like bees in a hive. Sleep for them is rationed like holy bread. A few hours after sunset, then another brief nap before dawn. Broken sleep, segmented, as modern scholars call it, wasn't just normal, it was disciplined. Monks believed waking in the middle of the night to pray kept the soul sharp. You wonder if it worked. You wonder if exhaustion ever whispered doubts into their minds, or if they simply learned to dream standing up. A friar passes you, carrying a candle that gutters in the draught. He nods politely, though his eyes look distant, like a man whose dreams still cling to his robe. You follow him into the dormitory. The rows of straw mattresses line the walls, each identical, each covered with coarse linen. The air smells faintly of sleep, wool, oil, breath, and something faintly sour. But it's peaceful here. There's an order to it, a rhythm that even the silence respects. One monk still lies asleep, his hand resting on a wooden cross. His lips move slightly, whispering something only his dreams can hear. You can't help but marvel. Even centuries later, that fragile space between waking and sleep feels timeless. The place where thought blurs into imagination. And that imagination, historians argue, might have fueled much of medieval mysticism. Take the Book of Dreams by Peter of Cornwall. Yes, that was a real thing. A 12th century monk who spent years collecting other people's dreams as though cataloging letters from heaven. Angels, demons, purgatory, prophetic symbols. His book was like an early database of the subconscious. Historians still argue whether he meant it all literally or metaphorically. But either way, it shows that medieval people weren't afraid of the strange landscapes of the mind. They expected them. You stroll further through the cloister, the floor cool beneath your feet. The rainwater still clings to the stone arches, catching tiny sparks of morning light. Somewhere in the distance a rooster crows, late but forgiven. You stop near the garden. Rows of herbs glisten, valerian, chamomile and lavender. The same plants peasants used in dream charms now grow under the careful hands of monks. You crush a leaf between your fingers. It releases that familiar sleepy scent. Maybe you think this was their real secret, not prayer alone, but chemistry hidden in petals. Your guide for the morning, a young monk named Brother Elias, joins you. He speaks softly as though sound itself might disturb the air. You travel far, he says. Do you sleep well? Sometimes, you admit. Sometimes not at all. He smiles knowingly. Then you share our struggle. Sleep is a gift we keep losing and finding again. You ask what they do when they can't sleep. He shrugs. We pray. We count psalms. Sometimes we imagine the stars as God's own clock, each one marking the breath between dreams. You look up. Even in daylight, you can almost picture it. The night sky as a ticking constellation clock, where every star is a reminder to rest. But not everyone in this world saw sleep as holy. Some saw it as dangerous, a temptation of sloth, a time when the devil whispered in dreams. You recall stories of people who were warned never to sleep too long, lest spirits slip into their bodies. In one old folk tale, a farmer naps under an elm tree and wakes possessed by night air, what we'd now call sleep paralysis. His neighbors tie him to a chair and recite prayers until he carves out the dream, a superstition sure, but also an early attempt to explain something terrifyingly real. The feeling of being awake but frozen, of shadows bending where they shouldn't. You keep walking, your boots crunching on gravel, and think about how much of human history has been shaped by the need to explain what the night does to us. Even the nobility had their rituals. Queen Eleanor of Aquitaine was said to have lavender sewn into her pillows to invite gentle sleep. Her husband Henry Sue preferred sleeping in separate chambers to escape her political conversations at midnight. Romance, right? Meanwhile, peasants often shared one bed for an entire family. Picture it: 2 adults, maybe 3 kids, sometimes even an elderly grandparent, all under one rough wool blanket. Privacy was rare, warmth was everything, and if someone snored, well, you just learned to dream louder. You smile at the absurdity of it all, yet there's a strange charm there. Sleep wasn't a solitary act, it was communal, woven into family and faith, fear and folklore. And maybe that's what draws you to this world tonight. Not just the oddities, but the humanity beneath them. You stop near a chapel door, where candlelight flickers inside. You push it open gently. Inside, the air feels different, thicker, softer. The scent of incense curls upward, forming thin ribbons that drift toward the vaulted ceiling. A few monks kneel in prayer, their voices blending into a hum that sounds more like breath than speech. You take a seat at the back and listen. The chants are steady, slow. Their rhythm could lull anyone to sleep. You close your eyes not out of piety, but because the sound itself feels like a lullaby written in Latin. Somewhere, your mind drifts again. To the peasants, the nobles, the friars, the dreamers. To the way sleep, in every class and creed, was both surrender and survival. Historians still argue whether the Middle Ages were an age of superstition or simplicity. But sitting here, you think maybe it was both, maybe it always is. The chanting fades. The candles gutter. Outside, the rain returns lighter now, a soft drizzle that seems to fall in rhythm with your breath. You stand, stretch, and step back into the courtyard. The world looks cleaner somehow, washed of all the night's worries. You take one last deep breath of the herb, scented air, and think of Brother Elias's words: sleep is a gift we keep losing and finding again. Maybe tonight, when you finally close your eyes, you'll find it too. You leave the monastery behind, the road dipping into valleys washed pale by morning mist. The air feels lighter here, as if the land itself is slowly waking from a long medieval dream. Every sound, the creak of your boots, the soft coo of a pigeon, seems drawn out, calm, unhurried. You've walked through centuries of strange sleep by now: nobles in velvet beds, peasants piled together for warmth, monks whispering prayers between naps. And yet, one last world of slumber still waits. The ordinary, everyday twilight between history and your own closing eyes. You reach a small hamlet at the edge of a forest. The sun tilts westward, spilling gold across the thatched roofs. Smoke rises from chimneys, curling into the crisp air. It's that perfect hour when everything slows down. Chores end, fires crackle, bread cools on the hearth. A child yawns in a doorway while her mother hums an old lullaby. You recognize the melody, something ancient, soft, and oddly mathematical. Most medieval lullabies weren't just songs, they were small prayers. Each note was meant to guide the soul safely through the dark. Inside one of the cottages, you pause at the threshold. A family is preparing for sleep. The father sets down his tools. The mother draws a wooden shutter closed. The glow of the hearth lights their faces as they settle onto their straw mattress. It's not grand, just a frame stuffed with reeds and wool. But it radiates the same comfort you feel when your head hits a pillow after a long day. You crouch near the fire, invisible to them, watching as the mother sprinkles a pinch of dried lavender into the flames. The air fills with sweetness. Keeps the dreams gentle, she whispers. It's an old custom, one whispered down generations. Firelight softens her face, the way candlelight softens the corners of a thought. She pulls the blanket tighter around her children, and soon the whole room breathes in rhythm, the slow, collective exhale of a family surrendering to the night. You could stay there for hours, listening to their quiet. The baby's soft coo, the wind outside, the low hum of embers. There's something etchingly peaceful about it. How sleep connects them all, no matter how far apart in time or class or belief. You step outside again. The stars are brighter now, so many that the sky looks crowded. You walk toward the forest edge, where the ground glows faintly silver under moonlight. The air is colder here, tinged with wood smoke and moss. A small pond lies still at the clearing's center, perfectly round, reflecting the sky like a mirror. You kneel beside it, touch the surface, and watch your reflection ripple. The water feels colder than you expect, but soothing, like the edge of consciousness itself. You think about all those centuries of sleepers, how they dreamed of omens, saints, lovers, and monsters, how they feared the nightmare and trusted the herbs, how they believed rest was half body, half soul. And you realize, not much has changed. We still look for meaning in our dreams, still fight sleeplessness with rituals, still reach for something bigger in the dark. You lean back against a tree, closing your eyes for a moment. The world around you hums quietly. A cricket, a drip of dew, the far-off echo of a church bell marking midnight. You smile. Somewhere, a medieval farmer might have been doing exactly this 1,000 years ago, listening to the same hum of night, wondering the same questions. Why do we dream? Where do we go when we close our eyes? Historians still argue whether dreams were ever meant to be understood, or if they're simply the mind's way of reminding us that it's bigger than we think. You stay like that for a long while, until the soundscape itself starts to lull you, like the steady rhythm of a distant tide. The tree at your back feels warm. The moonlight shivers through the leaves. Sleep is already on its way, patient and inevitable. And before the final wave takes you, you think one last half-awake thought, maybe history isn't about dates and kings at all. Maybe it's about the small, quiet things, like how people dreamed, how they feared the dark, and how they always woke up again. You exhale, the forest exhales with you, and the story, like the night, begins to fade. Down are 300 words. So now, as the last echoes of footsteps fade down that medieval road, let your own body settle into stillness. You've walked through candlelight and shadow, through straw beds and cloisters, through centuries of human longing for rest. The world around you grows slower with every breath. Imagine the hush of that distant village, the smell of rain and wood smoke, the faint creak of shutters, the whisper of someone's prayer drifting into sleep. Let those sounds wrap around you now, like the softest blanket. Your breathing finds its rhythm again, steady, gentle, almost ancient. The kind of rhythm that every sleeper, from monk to farmer to dreamer, has known for as long as there's been night. Each inhale gathers what remains of the day, each exhale lets it go. The stars hang above you, patient and still. The moon moves behind a thin veil of cloud, dimming just enough to make the darkness safe again. You can almost hear the faint hum of history resting, the world turning quietly beneath its sheets of time. There's nothing left to do now, nowhere left to go. You've seen how the past dreamed, now it's your turn. So close your eyes, feel the weight of the air settle around you, and drift into that slow, endless space between centuries, where even medieval ghosts finally find their peace. Sleep well.